We're going to get started. Today's session is building a culture of feedback for grades 6 through 8. All right, housekeeping. My name is Britta McCormick, and I'm the middle level education associate for ELA Standards at the State Department. And with me today, I have Mandy Hawker, who is our elementary ed associate, as well as Casey Brent Harvey, who wears a lot of hats, but she's here today as our secondary support person for ELA. And we are thrilled to be here together. They'll be helping out in the chat, letting people in, answering any questions you have. So feel free to message them if you need anything. But I would also like to know who you are. So if you will take a moment in the chat, tell me your name, what district you are from, and maybe what your role is within your school. Hello, hello. All right. Jessica and I go way back, so I'm glad to see her here. Fort Mill, literacy specialist, love it. English 1 teacher. Oh, I'm so glad you're here. We talked about that bridge between 7th, 8th, English 1 just yesterday. We were having that conversation. Oh, and an associate principal. Welcome. Hi, Aisha. Wonderful. I love to see a variety of districts and roles are represented. I love that. Middle school instructional coach. All right. We do have a note catcher for you today. We're going to drop that in the chat. This will serve as both your landing page and your resource document. So if you open it up, there will be places where you can respond throughout the session today, but there will also be links to any of the resources that I go over or review throughout. We will have some breakout rooms towards the end of the session where we'll open up 2 breakout rooms for you all to kind of explore some of the resources and put some things into action. And then we always like to reference our high quality instructional materials that have been adopted within your school districts, and know that they are your primary go-to for your resources in your classroom, and anything that we provide you today or share in our presentation is intended to be a supplement or a support to those high quality instructional materials. Okay, so because you are here live, if you will participate throughout the presentation, remain in attendance for the duration of the event, and then complete our feedback form at the end, we will be issuing recertification credit for your attendance. So you can look for that email within a week with your, excuse me, with your certificate. All right, so now that all of that is out of the way, let's go ahead and get to the good stuff. Our purpose today is to understand the importance of and the expectations for feedback for grade 6-8 and explore some evidence-based practices for incorporating that feedback into current instructional practices to support learning, student learning and mastery. So if you take a moment to read that purpose statement slowly, you'll see it is full of educator lingo. But I want you to take a moment to kind of deconstruct it, and in box 1 of your note catcher, think about the verbs, the nouns in the purpose statement, and in your own words, identify what you think you should be able to do when we're finished today. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to think through that, and then you can put it on your note catcher, but I'd also like for you to drop it in the chat. Explore how to use evidence-based practices for feedback to enhance student learning. Yes. It's an excellent paraphrase. See a couple more people chatting. We'll wait for those responses. Very good. Thank you, Tiffany. Learning how to incorporate those strategies and how to give effective feedback, how to use feedback with fidelity. Excellent. And how to support instruction and help students grow, which is always our ultimate goal. Okay, so sometimes feedback has a more negative connotation than positive. So I want you to think through what students may say, feel, think, or do when it comes to feedback, and then the same thing for teachers. So we're going to start with say. When you are providing feedback or talking about feedback in your classrooms, what are students saying? What are teachers saying? You can unmute or you can put it in the chat. What do you hear?
Kids want to know what their grade is.
Exactly.
And teachers want to know how they're going to have time to give it.
That's my number one. What did I get? That's all I really care about. Right? What did I get? Why did I lose points for that? I don't even get what your comment means, right? And then you're exactly right. Teachers, did you even read this, right? We've talked about this before. I'm giving this to you to help you, not criticize you, right? How do you think students and teachers are feeling with feedback? Aisha, I think your comment kind of goes into this one too, that it's just time consuming, right? We're feeling overwhelmed. Maybe students are feeling defensive or anxious or really just disconnected. They don't really care because the grade's the grade, so what does it matter? Um, Teachers might be feeling frustrated because students aren't reading their feedback or doing anything with it. They're overwhelmed. It takes too much time. Um, Same thing with what they're thinking. It just means I did something wrong. I already got a grade. What's the point of this? Um, Teachers are, why do I bother? Takes so much time, doesn't make a difference. And then what do students do with their feedback? Oftentimes.
I feel like I think it depends on the timing of when teachers give it. If it's like in
Mhm.
the middle of an essay cycle, they might use it. But if it's like on their finished product, it like finds its way to the recycling bin by the door on the way out.
That's exactly right, Jessica. And that's something we're going to talk about today is like feedback really isn't that effective or beneficial if it's only given with a grade at the end, right? Um, and so Aisha, with the positivity today, yeah, they often they listen and try again. But I agree that it really matters when that feedback is given, how often it's given, how it's given. Um, Mandy says she would dwell on it if it was during the cycle, and I 100% believe that about Mandy. She'd dwell on some feedback because I would too. So students are either going to ignore it or they're avoid looking at it, focusing only on the grade. Potentially they're repeating mistakes in future assignments. So we've got to figure out how we can negate that or avoid that. Teachers, when time is tight, they're not, they might do the first 20 essays real nice, and then they get to 21 and they're like, all right, well, I can't do this anymore, right? And so then the rest of the kids aren't getting the same quality. Um, or they just feel like they're repeating the same feedback over and over. So our job today is to figure out how to shift this kind of stereotypical narrative of feedback. How do we move from the way historically maybe students and teachers have felt about feedback and into a place where it actually is effective and it matters? So I'm going to have you read an article. It is linked on your note catcher on box number 3, but we'll also put it in the chat. And I want you to choose one statement from this article, it's really short, that you feel is particularly impactful, and then reflect on that with a connection, a question, a statement you might challenge, an aha moment. But give you about 4 minutes to skim and scan that article, pick a statement, and reflect, and then we will discuss. Excellent. So I'm seeing that feedback literacy is crucial because feedback alone does not ensure learning. Love that. Yes, and I don't think anyone would say, no, don't model things for students, but it really is everything needs to be modeled, right? So, how do we model how to use feedback um, with our students? I think that's a really valid point. The roles each plays are distinct. Yes. The teacher and the students both have very specific roles. Ashley, I love that. We assume that our older students know how to use feedback, but they might not, right? We've got to model and explain. It's an active process engaged by teachers and students continuously. It needs to be modeled and practiced regularly. Very good, y'all. So we had a couple of like aha moments as well, which are right in line with what y'all picked out. First, feedback literacy is a skill that must be explicitly taught. It is not an innate ability, and it really involves a set of understandings and attitudes and practices that both teachers and students need to develop over time. So for our students, this means learning how to interpret, evaluate, apply feedback in a way that actually improves their learning. And for teachers, it means designing these opportunities for meaningful feedback exchanges, modeling how to engage with feedback constructively. Um, Oftentimes, if we're not giving that explicit instruction, feedback's going to remain underused, misunderstood, which is really limiting its impact on learning. Secondly, both teachers and students need to be actively engaged in the feedback process. Feedback is most effective when it's part of a dialogue, so a conversation rather than just one directional. Um, we don't want to simply hand out comments or grades on papers. We really want to invite students into conversations about their learning progress. But also, students must be taught how to give and receive feedback, which is a really critical shift that gives them an opportunity to have ownership of their learning. Um, and finally, improving feedback literacy supports long-term learning and independence. So when students become feedback literate, they're better equipped to just become self-regulated learners in general. They begin to view feedback not as a criticism, but as a valuable tool for growth, which is something they need far beyond the classroom. And that mindset really fosters resilience, adaptability, and lifelong learning habits. So, for teachers, investing in feedback literacy means shifting the purpose of feedback from those short term corrections or quick fixes to long term development, which is ultimately going to benefit our students' achievement and confidence. So, the structure, now that we've kind of laid that foundation for feedback literacy in general, our structure today is going to be thinking about why feedback, some norms and expectations that we have for feedback based on our standards and based on what evidence-based practices tell us. Then we're going to go into some strategies called micro, mini, macro strategies, and then we are going to close it up for today. So let's hop into laying the foundation for feedback. So why feedback? We're going to look at the purpose or the benefits of feedback through three lenses today. And those lenses are number one, that feedback is an evidence-based practice in and of itself. Lens number two, it is a practice that helps prepare our students to be college and career ready. And then number three is that feedback is interwoven throughout the standards. So if you're working with teachers or students and you kind of need to give them, why are we doing this? Well, we focus on feedback and we find that it is important because it's proven to help you with your learning and your growth. It's going to help you in the real world, and because we have to, because it's in our standards, right? So we've got some evidence to really support why we focus on feedback. So I have one additional article I want you to read really quickly. Too far. I love a professional text. So this one is specifically explaining the difference between evidence-based and research-based because those two terms are often conflated or used synonymously, but they're not quite the same thing. So this time we want you to read it and jog. So review the article and jot down any important ideas and new thinking. Offer one way that you could incorporate evidence-based practices into your work or potentially that you already do. And then reflect on how you can apply any new learning in order to grow as an educator or possibly help the teachers that you support and work with grow. So again, I'll give you about 4 minutes to peruse the article and come up with your takeaways. All right, feel free to unmute or put in the chat maybe a takeaway that you had or something you're thinking. Look at you, Tiffany. Yes. So there is a difference, right? Think Hattie is my personal educational hero. So I'm right in line with that, right? We're talking about effect sizes and how beneficial specific strategies can be. Very good. And then we need to start using the term evidence-based instead of research-based to describe that. Our team here, the ELA team, we feel really strongly about language and being very specific with our language and how it really does matter, the things you say, whether it's we teach indicators, not standards, right? And that's a big language shift that matters. And the same thing with evidence versus research, right? We want to make sure that when we're choosing instructional strategies, that we're choosing those that have a little weight behind them and some data to show that, yeah, this is effective and this works. Yes, Alicia, not all research-based strategies are evidence-based. And we had yes, Ashley. Evidence-based practices require continuous improvement for teacher and students. Yes. Um, right. New ideas and practices arise, but that may be research-based, but that doesn't mean they're actually going to work in the same classroom, similar classrooms, every classroom. Absolutely. So our findings is that, the research-based are theoretical, based on initial research findings. Doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that we don't have that evidence yet to prove that it's going to be effective across multiple environments. You could still be in those experimental stages or early implementation phases. And our evidence-based really is based on that empirical evidence. We've got proven data that shows, hey, this is effective in real world settings across a wide variety of audiences. And feedback has a very high effect size. If you do study or look at John Hattie's work at all, you know that his threshold when he was calculating is a 0.4. And any strategy that has an effect size greater than 0.4 is going to accelerate student learning. And feedback is right up in that blue area above 0.4, which I think it's a 0.7. So that can significantly enhance student learning outcomes, and it falls within the top 10 most effective teaching strategies, but that's only if we are doing it effectively, right? And if students know how to use it, if teachers know how to use it. And this is the first lens, the first kind of support for using feedback in the classroom is that it is evidence-based. So now let's look at the profile of the South Carolina graduate. I'm sure all of you have this hanging right at your door as you walk out your classroom so that everyone can see and read it every day. So let's take a moment to review it and think about how feedback might influence the knowledge, skills, and characteristics of the profile. So, in what areas of the profile do you see an opportunity to integrate feedback, or a place where feedback is necessary um, for students to be successful recipients of this profile? And you can chat, you can unmute. Absolutely, Jessica. Critical thinking, collaboration, teamwork. If you're collaborating with someone, whether it's a dialogue, a conversation, or a team project, you're going to be providing feedback of some sort. Yes, Casey. Even if feedback isn't directly stated, explicitly mentioned, it is integral in meeting these expectations. It's going to influence the knowledge and skills and characteristics of this profile. You cannot communicate with others without providing some sort of feedback, or receiving in a respectful and effective way. Yes, Alicia, perseverance. Sometimes you get feedback that isn't very easy to hear. So, how do we handle that? What do we do with it? And so, lens number 2 is that feedback is essential for our students to become college and career ready, to become citizens outside of the school building. And then number 3, the third lens, is that feedback is a part of our ELA standards. And so we're going to explore some of the ways that feedback shows up or appears within our 2024 SC CCR ELA standards. And so I assume everyone knows there are 4 strands for our new standards. We've got foundations of literacy, applications of reading, research and written and oral communication. So we're going to look at where feedback shows up in these areas. We're going to use the SAW method for you to take a look at vertical articulation document. Specifically, on your note catcher, you have Communications 5.1, Communications 8.1, and the overarching expectations. You don't have to look at all 3, just choose one. And within that vertical articulation, I want you to consider where feedback is represented. Where do you see feedback represented within the vertical articulation of your choosing? And so I'll give you 4 minutes to look at your vertical articulation and annotate some of that thinking and respond on your note catcher. Jessica, so you looked at Communications 5.1, and feedback is a tool for improving writing. Yes. The verbiage there is that feedback is meant to improve, not just correct. And I also love that word improve because it also means not perfect, right? Our students are middle schoolers. Chances are they're not going to be publishing perfection, right? So really, we need to make sure that they're meeting the expectation of grade level indicators, and that might mean it's not perfect. And our little ELA love and hearts have to be okay with that, right? As hard as it is. So overarching expectation 2 uses the word refine. Yes, and feedback is going to help students to refine their writing. Again, OE4, collaboration with others. That's a great way for students to collaborate to create quality work, which is overarching expectation 6. Yes, I love that synthesis. Citing and explaining evidence. I love that. 8.1, in order for students to be able to engage in structured conversations and collaborations, reflect upon the ideas expressed and consider the ideas of others, right? Very good. Writing for a purpose. Yep, absolutely. Excellent. So we do have some of our findings. It's the exact same thing that you guys noticed. We've got C point 5.1. Again, it's an opportunity for students to improve writing by revising for either clarity of content or cohesiveness. I think it's important to remember that feedback always has a purpose, right? Whether it's to improve your writing or improve the way that you communicate with others. And I want to point out here that it says feedback from adults and peers, which means that students inevitably have to be able to both give and receive feedback, right? It's not just receiving, because if you're going to be receiving it from a peer, that means a peer has to give it, right? So we need to support our students in the ability to give feedback appropriately, but also receive it. And sometimes it's harder for them to receive from peers than it is the adults. In addition, we've got 8.1. And 8.1 shows that feedback doesn't just apply to writing. I think as English teachers, when we say feedback, the first thing we think is an essay. Let's red pen it, right? But we need to be providing feedback through all of our strands, and we need to be doing it frequently and consistently, because it does apply to the way we think, the perspectives we have as well. Oftentimes, feedback is what kind of shifts students' thinking and beliefs on new ideas or diverse perspectives. We want students to be able to think critically based on what feedback other people give. And then finally, overarching expectations, I would say that you could probably make an argument one way or the other for all 6 of the overarching expectations and feedback. I specifically just pointed out 1, 2, 4, and 6. That, obviously creating quality work comes from that whole process of refining and receiving feedback that helps us refine our work. Collaboration, you all brought that up. Reading and writing for a variety of purposes. So we see that feedback is interwoven throughout our standards. So those 3 lenses really give us the foundation for why feedback is essential. It's evidence-based practice that is going to increase student learning and growth. It is interwoven throughout our ELA standards, and it supports our students as college and career-ready learners. So really quickly, we're going to do a virtual turn and talk. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond to a prompt that I'm about to show you. And then after that 30 seconds, I'll tell you time's up. I want you to either add or connect to a response in the chat. So you'll go to someone who has already responded and you will reply to their comment. So here's your prompt, 30 seconds to respond in the chat. What is the one piece of information from this section that we just went through that you would take back to your school or district to share? The one piece that you think is most important. Mm, take about 10 more seconds. Mm. All right, find one of the responses in the chat and reply. Yes. Very good. I love these conversations, and I'm so glad that you all had thoughtful takeaways from that foundational piece of why feedback matters, and hopefully a little bit of an arsenal now to go back to teachers and students and say, hey, this really does matter, and here's why. All right, so now let's get into the norms and expectations for feedback. So what does effective look like? Effective feedback look like? What should we be expecting from students, and what should we be expecting from teachers? My first question, now that we've had all this conversation about feedback, is how would you define it? So in the chat, give me a quick definition. What is your definition of feedback? Excellent. Supportive guidance to help improvement. I see the word improve in all of these. Giving you next steps. Love that. Helping someone else see what they may have missed. Absolutely. Bringing perspectives together to improve the work. I love that. All right. So Hattie and Clark define feedback as the information about the task that fills a gap between what is understood and what is aimed to be understood. So a little bit more of a technical definition that I think summarizes everything that you all are saying in the chat, right? Yes, our team goes through a very rigorous feedback process. Just as adults here working in this office, Casey and Mandy and I never put a product out to the public facing that has not been rigorously looked at and intensively given feedback from the other of us, because we want to look at each other's blind spots, and we see the value in that. So how do we help our students see the value in that as well? So I hope that you'll see some alignment with this definition and the definitions that you crafted in the chat. But my next question is, do these definitions that either you crafted or that you see on the screen, are they aligning with what you see taking place in middle school classrooms, in your school, in your district? And so some people, I saw a head shake. I think some people would say, well, sometimes depends on the teacher, depends on the assignment, depends on the student. So how do we help that become a consistently understood and effectively implemented practice across all of our classrooms? So let's look at some norms. We know that we've got to think about who gives the feedback and who receives the feedback. Well, according to our standards, it's adults and peers should be both giving and receiving feedback. So what does that mean? What does that look like? Really, it could be anybody who's relevant to whatever it is that you're working on. Obviously, teachers, other school staff, who can we pull in to provide feedback? Maybe this might be more at a high school level, but let's consider seniors who are writing resumes or college entrance essays. The English teacher doesn't have to be the only person to look at that. If they're writing, they want to go to a welding school, maybe the welding teacher needs to take a look at what they've written, right? Your parents can give really great feedback. Business owners, if it's relevant to the assignment, if you've got students writing a business plan for gardening equipment, go to a local gardener. Ask, does this make sense? What am I missing? Where are my blind spots? Community members. And the same with peers. Yes, classmates, but who else? Are we talking specifically to our friends? Do we need to go outside of that circle? Maybe to some people who aren't just going to tell us what we want to hear. Maybe we're reaching out to community members of the same age, another middle school in your district. Or are we bringing in some global peers of the same age? Is there opportunity to do that? And what about that feedback might look different or be more targeted than what we can get from Susie in the desk next to us? So when and why? When and why are we giving feedback? Adults, I think, particularly teachers, our number one place is going to be that structured setting of the classroom. that we're going to give it to really make sure that we're focusing in on our objectives and learning goals, that we're giving clarity on academic standards, what students should be learning, or we're evaluating based on our assignment requirements. But ultimately, that goal that you guys have hit on again and again in the chat is for improvement. Right? We want our students to improve, to get better. And feedback is part of that getting better at getting better. Peers might be an informal setting. It tends to be a little bit more subjective or opinion based than what a teacher's feedback would be. It's going to be based on shared experiences and perspectives. And oftentimes it's to help students brainstorm, form ideas. They just have a different lens than what a teacher would bring to that. In saying that, not all feedback is equal, right? Just because we say that we've given feedback or a student has given feedback to another student doesn't mean that feedback is effective or that it's promoting student growth. According to Hattie, ineffective feedback exists on a massive scale, with 32% of feedback having a negative effect, meaning that it actually hurts students' growth. So how do we avoid that? We've got to build students' feedback literacy and build a culture of effective feedback. And to do that, we have to have some standards. So how do we promote feedback literacy in our classrooms, and how do we ensure that our feedback is effective? And we're going to take a look at 3 norms today that all teachers can establish in their classrooms, or the schools can establish at a school level, to help do those things. So number 1 is that we've got to foster feedback literacy. It's not going to happen on its own naturally because it's not an innate skill that our students have. Number 2, feedback works best when there is also a feed up and a feed forward, and we'll talk about what those mean. And then norm number 3, effective feedback is fast and formative. So we're going to briefly go through each one of these norms and give some strategies for what that might look like in classrooms and schools. All right, number 1, feedback literacy must be fostered. So if you look at this particular graphic of a feedback model, you'll notice that feedback literacy is at the core of a feedback-rich culture. So if culture is the outside and everything inside of it is what builds that culture, very, very center is feedback literacy. Students and teachers knowing how to give and receive effective feedback. And around that is the experiences, the receiving, the processing of feedback, the implementation of feedback, the giving of feedback. So it really is a very essential part of the feedback process. So there are 3 areas, I guess you could say, where feedback literacy come together and intersect, and those are experiential, intrapersonal, and interpersonal. And 2 of these 3 areas are directly linked to our ELA standards expectations for middle school, and they're places that we as teachers can have direct impact on students' growth in feedback literacy. So we're going to look at what each of these 3 mean and then see how they align with our standards. So experiential, these are those practical experiences and interactions that build feedback skills. So giving students opportunities to practice giving and receiving feedback. Your interpersonal, those are the relational skills like communication, active listening. We have to have those skills in order to provide and receive effective feedback. And then intrapersonal are your internal skills such as self-awareness, emotional intelligence. Now, we can't always regulate or serve students in the area of emotional intelligence and self-awareness, but the other 2, we have a very huge opportunity to impact students' growth in these areas. So with our experiential, that falls within C point 5.1 and our overarching expectations. It's part of our expectation to provide students experiences to have interactive feedback. And then with our relational skills like communication, active listening, that's C point 8.1, and the overarching expectations. So it's within our expectations as middle school teachers to provide students with communication and active listening skills and opportunities to practice those skills. So we have a place in that puzzle. So what does this look like? Well, to develop our interpersonal skills, we want to model active listening. Um, really model, and Jessica said this earlier, like model how to have interactions with each other, showing how to engage with feedback, how to respond thoughtfully, how to implement feedback that is given. We have to provide opportunities for peer feedback. Unfortunately, things like feedback or just really conversation in general between students tends to be one of the things that's cut when we're running out of time. And really, it's probably where we're going to find the most value in student growth and learning. We want to foster that environment of trust, making sure that the classroom is a safe place for students to give and receive feedback and teach those effective communication techniques explicitly. Then for experiential, we can provide and weave in opportunities all day, all throughout the class period for students to practice giving and receiving feedback. So maybe it's a post feedback reflection activity. We have feedback journals or just an opportunity for students to think about how what they've learned could be applied to future activities. Um, Encouraging regular feedback requests, telling students it's okay for you to come and ask, to seek feedback from me or a classmate, and really building in this continual loop of improvement. And use stretch assignments whenever you can. So, assignments that are going to challenge students to go beyond that comfort zone. Um, Really, those assignments are going to provide valuable opportunities for feedback, which is making feedback an integral part of that learning process. So in the chat, thinking just about feedback literacy and teaching students, I want you to complete one of the following sentences. I changed my perspective, I am more aware of, or I am considering. Mm. And I hope you see that even in this process right now, as I'm giving you the opportunity to kind of reflect in the chat, I see that you are using my feedback or this instruction to kind of shift your thinking and consider what you could do or change or add for your future instruction. And even something as simple as this is an excellent model for students of like, you've provided me some feedback on feedback, and now I'm changing what I might do. Very good. All right, norm number 2, feedback is best when it also includes a feed up and a feed forward. So give me a thumbs up if you've heard like feed up, feed forward before. All right, some people say yes, some people say no. Great. I like that. I like when we can learn something new, right? So feed up, feedback, and feed forward. Your feed up is going to be what am I aiming for? So this, well, let me come back to it. Your feedback is where am I now? And your feed forward is where do I go next? So if you think of this in terms of who's doing the work here, your student is going to be responsible for that feed up. So it's really creating a culture where students come to you knowing what their need is. Hey, I would like feedback on blank. Feedback is going to be your teacher responsibility. And then feed forward is going to be the student and teacher work together to think about next steps. So feed up and feed forward are really framing the feedback. And of course, teachers and students can have responsibility in any of these 3 areas, but the feed up allows students to set the goal. The feedback allows the teacher to speak to the process toward the goal. And the feed forward provides a space for the teacher and student to really work together to plan next steps. All right, so feed up. what could this look like? How can students think through feedback? There's a couple of steps, 5 of them. We're going to start with clarifying the goal. So you want your students to get in the habit of always asking themselves, what am I trying to learn or get better at today? Based on what you're learning, set a personal goal for what you want to understand or be able to do. When you know where you're headed, it's easier to stay on track and ignore distractions. Try to see the bigger picture, why you're doing a certain task or lesson so it feels meaningful, and then use that goal to reflect on your learning. Are you getting closer? What's helping or getting in the way? And so when you are teaching students how to think through feed up, these are the targeted questions you can ask. These are the conversations you can be having. What are we learning today? How does that impact you? What are you good at? What do you need help in? We're really helping students become more self-aware of, you know what, I need help here. And also showing them that once you have a goal, that is what your focus is. I think feedback, often we fall into a trap or where we're giving too much at one time and we're marking everything, we're focused on everything. Students feel overwhelmed because they have so much to fix. But when they can come to you with a singular or potentially two, hey, these are the areas that I know I need to work on, that is super weightlifting for our students, and really allows us to provide very targeted instruction, and gives our students very targeted focus for their work. And that doesn't mean that teachers don't sometimes help students see around their blind spots and that we don't point things out like, gosh, you know what, that's true. Let's work on that, but let me give you one more. That's completely appropriate. But we really want students to really get into the habit of thinking through their own goals. It's going to be more relevant and meaningful to them when they do that. And so when we think about feed forward, which is a process that teachers and students can work together to achieve, we're going to look at what that looks like for the student on top and for the teacher on the bottom. So students are going to use that feedback to set new goals. We're looking, we're listening, and we're asking, what can I do better next time? Based on that, we're setting a goal to improve the strategies, deepen our understanding, or correct a mistake. We're going to continue to grow, think more deeply about what we're learning, and then we're understanding that goals change. So once I've achieved this, that doesn't mean that I stop. I'm done. Now let's set a new goal. Let's look at what's next. Now, for teachers, it also means that we might adjust our instruction. So if we are seeing the same goal come up and feed up conversations from multiple students, what does that tell us, right? Maybe we need to go back to the drawing board with another whole class mini lesson. Maybe we need to pull a small group. But what we're noticing is that several students are coming to us with these same questions. So what do we need to teach next? How do we support that student, or the entire class or a small group? And then also, we want to make sure that we're noticing how students are responding to the support. So if we give targeted instruction or we revisit as a whole group lesson, are they getting it now? Do we need to respond in a different way? Or do we need to maybe continue to revisit a skill because students aren't remembering it or aren't able to accurately implement what we're giving them? So feed up, feedback, feed forward. You're giving responsibility to the student, responsibility to the teacher, and then a shared responsibility for students to create next steps with teacher help, but also the teacher to then say, where's my next step as the instructor? All right, so a pause and ponder again. Complete one of the following sentences. The teacher's role in feedback is, the student's role in feedback is, and I am considering. Yes. Students' role is to identify what they're trying to learn or get better at and then help set a goal. Set clear goals, should be targeted and not about everything they could possibly improve. Which, you're going to have students who come to you and like, oh, it's perfect, everything's right. And you're going to have students who come to you and say, can you just tell me everything that I need to fix? Yes, the teacher's role is to take where the student currently is and show them how to move forward. Excellent. All right, norm number 3 is that effective feedback is fast and formative. Chances are you have heard of fast feedback or some version of this. If you like Googled fast feedback, you're going to get lots of different acronyms for what the FAST could stand for. So this is my version. Know that if you've heard a different one, that's fine. We're going to use frequent, actionable, stretchable, and timely as our FAST acronym. The frequent meaning that feedback should be given regularly to ensure students stay on track and continuously improve. This we touched right at the beginning of the webinar today, thinking through like, yeah, feedback's likely to have a negative connotation when it's only given at the end with a grade, right? It's going to go in the recycling bin because it doesn't matter. We've already got our grade. Right? So we want to make sure students are receiving frequent feedback because it helps learners address issues promptly and adjust their work as needed as they go along. Feedback should also be actionable. It should be specific and clear enough so that the learner knows exactly what steps they need to take to improve. It should focus on behaviors or actions that can be changed rather than vague or general comments. Again, it doesn't need to be so much that the student literally cannot take action. We want to focus on 1 or 2 very clear, specific goals. Stretchable. Feedback should be aimed at goals or tasks that are challenging, that they stretch students' abilities, but they remain attainable within the time constraints, right? We want to make sure that in the improvement process, we're not overwhelming students, but we are pushing them a little bit into that next boundary. And it should encourage progress, not set an unattainable expectation. And then finally, timely. It should be provided as soon as possible after the learner's performance so that information is still fresh. Timely feedback allows the learner to make immediate adjustments and reinforce the learning process. It also lifts a little bit of the cognitive load because students aren't having to think back to like, what did we learn? What were we doing? What was the goal of this assignment? They're right there in the thick of it, and all of that is fresh on their minds. So this is how we are going to look at fast feedback. So let me give you an example. This is good, but you need to include more information. So if you are working with a teacher and this is the feedback they've provided, how could you revise this feedback using that FAST framework? So how could we make this actionable, stretchable, give a little more information? Mm,
They need clarity on what they need to include more of.
right. That's not actionable, right? That's not an actionable statement. So let me show you an example that includes each of the frequent, actionable, stretchable, timely. All right, so you have a great start here. For your next draft, that shows that this is happening frequently. Try to include more specific data on slide 5. What if you reference the article we read in class last week? That's actionable. Let's make a goal for you to revise to add the data by Wednesday. So that's stretchable. We're giving them a little bit of a challenge, but it's doable because you have a couple days. And then we can review together in class on Thursday. So it's timely. We're going to come back to that the day after you revise it. So this is an example we can give teachers to look at and say, okay, Are all 4 of these pieces showing up in the feedback conversations or the written feedback, the communication? Ashley, I saw your comment, and I absolutely think that AI can play a huge role in providing student feedback. Um, you know, we need to make sure that the models look like the one on the right and not the one on the left, right? All right, so that's the fast piece. So what does formative mean in relation to feedback? Often when we use the word formative, it is followed by the word assessment, right? So how do we then change that to formative feedback? Yes, that word improve again, right? Formative feedback is designed to improve, not just give a right or wrong. So I have got a little article that I kind of pieced together from a couple of different places. Senior note catcher on grade on box 8, but it is also in the chat, and it's about formative feedback. So I'm going to give you 4 minutes to read and consider what formative feedback is. I love, Tiffany, your point that it's coming before the grade. There's always going to be an opportunity to improve, right? To take a minute, 4 minutes, and consider what has been clarified and maybe what feels challenging in response to formative feedback. Ashley, that is so relevant and real. That timeliness is the challenge when you've got 125 students' work to give quality feedback to. Yep. Amen. And so I think leveraging tools like AI or peer, if we've effectively coached our students to give each other feedback, that's where we steal some of that time back, for sure. Yeah, Jessica, I love that. Building in structures that are routine. And in a moment, I'm going to show you some strategies for feedback at various lengths. So a feedback strategy that would take 1 to 3 minutes, and then feedback strategies that are going to take, 5 to 6 minutes, and then ones that are more in depth. Okay, so right now I'm going to show you kind of 2 ways to look at formative feedback. So, and kind of outside broad view that you might use with a whole class, and then a more detailed look that you would use with an individual student. So observe, identify, address. This is probably going to seem like, oh, well, duh, we do this all the time. But sometimes you just need things named and spelled out for us. So one option for providing formative feedback is to do a whole class review. So you're really providing an opportunity to address common needs or issues with student work early on, and then use models to target those needs. This is going to help prevent the need to give that same feedback over and over and over once you get towards the end of that work production cycle. So at the early stages of whatever it is you've taught, instructed, and students are then practicing, you're observing and you're identifying patterns or common errors. So things that 3 to 5 or more students are struggling with, and then you specifically take the time to address the need using models that align with those needs. So again, this is just good teaching, good observation, monitoring, and adjusting. But it is a feedback process where you are looking as a whole, your entire class, what patterns, what common errors am I seeing, and then taking the time to reteach. Because sometimes I think we feel like, oh my gosh, won't have time to reteach that whole lesson. But it really is saving you time in the back end when you're not having to do it 17 times individually with students in a writing conference or whatever it may be. Now, the other example that I have for you might be done by teachers or peers in mini conferences or discussions, and just call it the DISC method. So you sit with a student and you describe what you're noticing. And then you describe how this impacts you or the student as a reader, writer, or communicator. And I'm going to show you an example of this in a minute. But this, I think, is probably the most beneficial portion of this is the why. So if you tell a student, hey, you really need more details there, he's going to be like, why? I know what I mean, so really explaining how what the student has done and what revisions you're suggesting, how that impacts them or you is essential. Suggest a resource or a consideration for improvement. Give them something that they can walk away with, that they can use on their own to make those improvements, and then make a plan to circle back to make sure that the feedback was applied appropriately and effectively. So what does this look like? We're going to look first, I believe, at a writing example because that is typically what we think about in feedback for ELA. So maybe the teacher says, hey, I'm noticing that you use the word thing 5 times in this paragraph, right? So here's the impact. When I was reading, I felt disconnected from what you were talking about, and I found myself wishing I could really picture what you were discussing. So the fact that you used thing 5 times left me feeling disconnected. So remember when we played the game of things in class to practice writing with specific concrete details? I'd suggest revisiting the handout on Google Classroom that we use to help you replace thing with memorable sensory details. So we've given a support. We've told them why we're asking them to make the revision, and then we're going to circle back. Let's take a look at this again after you've added more specific details. When you're done, we can review together to see how it flows. Let me know if you need any help finding the handout, right? And that could be done fairly quickly for just a quick conversation with students. Now, what does it look like outside of writing in the ELA classroom? So I noticed that your response to the question about how the main character changes over the course of the story doesn't include any examples from the text. You mentioned that the character becomes nicer, but you didn't explain how we can see this in the story. So when you don't include specific examples or quotes, it makes it harder for me as a reader to follow your reasoning or understand what you mean. It's important because when you give concrete examples, it strengthens your argument and shows a deeper understanding of the character's development. So again, we're showing them the impact of what they were missing or what we're asking them to revise. I suggest going back to the text and looking for at least one moment where the character shows a shift in behavior. Maybe you can underline or highlight the passage and then explain how that change is reflected in their actions or words. Let's touch base tomorrow after you've had a chance to look at it. I'll check to see if you can now explain how the character's behavior changes from evidence in the story. Let me know if you have any questions. So again, this is formative. We're in the moment. We're giving them a suggestion. We're telling them how it impacts them as a reader or a writer. And it's very timely. And we're coming back to it fairly quickly. So in the chat, complete one of these sentences thinking about fast and formative feedback. Formative feedback is, fast feedback is, and I can use. Formative feedback is while the kids are working. Yes, specific and small things they can work on. We can use fast feedback to help structure peer feedback. Yes. Excellent. Disc models and PLCs. Yes. Oh, I love that idea of using these models with teachers so that they can then replicate them. And so this, what I'm going to show you now, it was going to be a breakout room, but I think I'm going to just kind of talk through an example of it and then move to the next section because I think you'll find more value in the next section. But you have 4 scenarios on your note catcher that if you wanted to do this with teachers to really help them with feedback, you've got these 4 scenarios you can work with already. But I'm going to walk through an example with you just so you see what that process looks like. So students in Ms. Jimenez's class are working in groups to create a presentation about a topic of their choice. She wants the students to regularly provide feedback to each other to ensure their work is high quality and meets the presentation requirements. While observing the feedback sessions, she consistently hears feedback such as, "It looks okay," "You should probably just start that over," "I like the colors." So these are what the students are telling each other. And she's obviously thinking, that's not quite the high quality feedback I was looking for. So if you were to do a scenario activity with teachers such as this one, you'd ask them then, okay, so think about your norms for feedback. that feedback literacy must be fostered. Feedback is best when it also includes a feed up and feed forward, and effective feedback is fast and formative. Where would you ask this teacher to start? Like, where maybe has she missed the mark with her students providing feedback to each other? Which of these norms might you refer her to go back to? All right, so fast and formative, that, hey, are you providing that actionable? Is it clear? Is it concise? Absolutely. So in my example, that's so funny that you all went to fast, because my first instinct was that feedback literacy must be fostered. That was my first instinct. And there's no right or wrong answer here by any means. But I'm thinking, like, gosh, did she take the time to really teach her students? And within that, maybe fast and formative is part of that, teaching students that how to give that feedback. And so maybe some support I would give: model effective feedback using real or sample student work. Think aloud as you give feedback that is fast and formative. So what you said also. Maybe you co-create a checklist or a rubric for students to use during peer feedback. Encourage them to refer to the criteria when giving feedback so that it's focused and relevant. So really giving them some structure or some boundaries in what you expect. So this is just a strategy that you can use to work with teachers or your team or a PLC or whoever it is that you may be wanting to practice feedback with, to think through, how do we use the norms for feedback to improve ourselves and our own instruction. All right, so this is the piece I think you're going to find most helpful. So that's why I wanted to kind of move forward and dig in here. Our micro, mini, and macro feedback. So if you've been in any of our other webinars or worked with any of us in person, you've probably heard of this micro, mini, macro idea. Essentially, it's experiences, activities, lessons, whatever, that are a range in complexity, length, depth, because we want to provide our students with a variety of opportunities for reading and writing and learning. And so a micro experience might be something that, this is an activity that's going to take less than a class period. A mini is 1 to 2 class periods, and then macro would be a culminating experience. So that's kind of the lens of what we're looking through in general. And we have lots and lots of micro, mini, and macro suggestions, lesson plans, activities that help with reading, writing, all three modes of writing, as well as the revision process that I'll get that link to you if it's not on your landing page already. But I've kind of flipped this, or kind of molded it into a micro, mini, macro feedback experiences. So how do we structure feedback if we only have 1 to 3 minutes to do this? How do we structure feedback if we only have 4 to 6 minutes? How do we structure feedback if we've got all the time in the world, because we live in utopia? So we have all the time to give all the feedback. So what could these experiences look like? What tools do I have to help students with this? So you're going to look on your note catcher, box 10, and I think Mandy's going to put it in the chat also. And you're going to take just a minute to independently look at some of the strategies that I have for you in the feedback resource folder. You're going to use USA strategy, which means think about what you might be able to immediately use in your planning instruction out of those folders. What resource could you potentially share with some colleagues? And then what resource is good, but you're going to have to adapt it a little to maybe align with your grade level or your instruction. So I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to just kind of peruse the folder, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms and apply some of those strategies. So giving you a minute just to get familiar with what's in there. All right, anything catch your eye off just the top quick look? Something that seems useful, adaptable, shareable? Stoplight model, yep. I love a color-coded visual, yes. And that's really the intention of these, is to build routines that are sustainable and that you can do quickly and that students identify and understand, so that you can eventually just very quickly Hey, we're going to do a detect, reflect, direct. Hey, we're going to do whatever it may be, a goal, glow, grow. Absolutely. Okay, so now I'm going to put you to the test. In a moment, Mandy's going to put you into some breakout rooms. We're going to have 2 breakout rooms, 3 people each. There are 4 collaboration documents linked on your note catcher. When you get in your room, just decide which one you're going to do. Just decide real quick. Say, okay, let's open number 2, whatever it may be. It should force you a copy, so you won't all be working in the same document, but you'll all be able to see the document. You're going to read the scenario, review the student work, and then think back to the resources that you just looked at. Choose one of them that could be helpful for that teacher in the scenario. Think through the questions on your document, and then we're going to come back and discuss. So just a scenario type activity to think, how might you support teachers and students using these resources and the norms that you've learned today? Any questions about that? Okay, so we're going to pop you in breakout rooms. I'm going to start with 10 minutes and then I'll check in and see how everyone's doing, and we will adjust from there. Come back, friends. All right, so just really quickly, we're going to have one person from each room just kind of share maybe brief, what was your scenario about? What did you notice? What did you choose?
All right, so our group had collaboration document number 3, which was about Darius, an 8th grade student, and he was struggling to paraphrase a paragraph about climate change because his first attempt, he was just reordering the words from the text or changing a couple of words, but essentially copying the text. And then his second attempt, he lost some of the meaning of the text because it went way far into like his own conversational language. So the next step for the teacher is we decided meet with him and have a 1-minute teacher conference. So this was in the micro strategies of the resources folder: goal, glow, grow. So they talk about what the goal is. She gives specific praise on what he's done so far. And then the grow part, we thought this was really important, is modeling or showing an exemplar. Mm-hmm. What should paraphrasing look like? And then he could go back and give it another attempt. The norm that we felt like this aligned most with was feed up, feed forward, because it involves the student setting the goal from the get-go. And then we said that the choice aligns with C5-1 in particular because he has to revise thinking.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, my other group.
I can share it for our
Okay.
group. We looked at the document number 4. So it was the very beginning of research unit where kids were coming up with their research questions, and the student's question was how do animals survive in the wild. So it was really broad. So we felt like a good next step would be to use one of those mini strategies because it's the beginning and it's questions. It could be really quick and simple. We liked the tag one and also the goal setting zoom in and zoom out, just so you give the student an opportunity to kind of re-explain what a good research question should look like. And then it might actually look like that. And then giving them actionable steps, like you need to probably narrow down the focus a little bit more because there's lots of different elements to surviving in the wild. So try and make it more specific. And it fits with the kind of the same as last group with the feed up, feed forward one, but especially since it's at the beginning of the process. We talked about how it actually kind of fits with the 8.1, the idea of modifying your thinking after you've had discussion and talked to people, because you're going to, the student ideally would be listening to input from a teacher or a peer and changing their own thinking about the topic that they're interested in, and also they're thinking about like the research process and what their steps are going to need to be going forward.
I love that. Yes, thank you. I hope that that time just getting to talk with someone who you're probably never going to have really great opportunities to talk to across the state, and thinking through that process is super helpful. You obviously, each group has 3 other scenarios that you're welcome now to use to think through, to work on with any teachers you support. So feel free to do that. Just kind of as an aside note, within the next week, you will receive this recording as well as a copy of the slide deck and a copy of the note catcher. So you'll get all of those resources and your recertification certificate. So thank you for taking that time to really engage and participate in the breakout room. We are going to wrap it up, revisit our purpose for today, which was to understand the importance of feedback, the expectations that our standards have for grades 6 through 8, and then take a look at some evidence-based practices for incorporating feedback into our instructional practices. So my question for you is, how do we meet the purpose today? What's one piece of that you say, yep, checklist, we met that purpose?
We talked about the evidence-based practices, and the resources folder has several of them that we can use.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, and as a final just reflection piece for our work today and our learning, I want you to choose one of these, either the triangle, the circle, or the square. And in the chat or unmute, what are 3 important ideas you're taking away from the session? Maybe what's still circling in your head? Is there anything you're still trying to understand? Or what's something that squares up or matches with the thinking you already had or the values that you have for your classroom? So just choose one.
So I'm choosing the square,
Okay.
because like I've always been a very writing heavy teacher, and then I'm moving into my position that I'm in now and finding that writing instruction, and not just writing instruction, but like I'm really appreciative to see this being emphasized at the state level, not just focusing on feedback, because focusing on the process and the fact that it's never perfect, and actually having some strategies I can take back to my teachers. You know, like, here's how you can incorporate feedback
Yeah.
in a digestible way, because
Right.
That's really going to be helpful for me.
Good. Thank you, Nathan. And I'm seeing, yes, Jessica, thinking about feedback literacy, right? How to use it, how to understand it, how to give the strategies for reading as well as writing. Yes, feedback. We already knew it was impactful, but how are we more intentional with it? I love those